Good morning from Panhandle Outdoors with Winston Chester. Panhandle Outdoors, your source for fishing, hunting, and information for folks who enjoy the great outdoors. Now sit back, relax. It's Panhandle Outdoors.
Good morning. Welcome to Panhandle Outdoors. It's Monday, November the 3rd, and I'm Bill Allen sitting in for Winston Chester this morning. Today, weather brought to us by Haney Technical Center. We're looking at a high today of 71 and a low tonight of 53. Anticipated wind out of the east at 10 miles an hour, and of course you can always add a little bit to that. Looking at our tides today, there's not a whole lot of water moving today. It's going to be a little tough. The low at 2:42 a.m. this morning, a high at 8:48 a.m., and then the low again at 12:49 p.m. with the high at 7:34 p.m. And the tides are brought to us by my buddy Greg over at Kent Forest Lawn Funeral Home. We got a great show lined up for you this morning with a couple of special guests. We're going to talk about the situation in the bay right now. The water's cooling down, and maybe what we can do to help you catch some more fish. So we're going to take this break. We'll be right back. Hey, and welcome back. I'm joined this morning by two good friends and great captains, Mr. Matt Smith and Justin Lee. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Before we get started, I neglected to mention the river readings this morning, but we're looking at the Apalachicola is at 2 feet this morning. You can see, you know, it's been on a steady decline. It did get up a little bit with some of that rain we had. And then the Choctawhatchee is at 3 feet, and it's really holding pretty level. And guys, I have made a couple of trips down there to Howard's Creek in the lower end, and the brim are practically jumping in the boat. It is a great time to be down there, and also with that water being low and squirrel, it's November now. Mm-hmm. Squirrel season is upon us in a few days, and there's a lot of high, dry land up there and a bunch of acorns. It is going to be good.
Perfect conditions.
So let's get to fishing, what your specialties, all right? It's starting to cool down. We had a nice cool weekend, low in the 40s. Water's getting a little bit cooler. Things got to change a little bit if you're going to keep catching fish. So what are you guys doing right now? How are you preparing for this cooler weather coming on, like with your clients and fishing?
Well, it is nice that it is finally cooled down. I think we're going to start moving into our fall patterns. You know, usually October, it seems like we start to move into our fall patterns. I think we were a little behind this year, kind of like everything else has been this year. Yeah. Everything's been a couple weeks behind, but
we have actually, though, had a fall this year.
That's right.
We didn't go directly to winter.
That's right. True. But I think now that the water's starting to cool down a little bit, we're going to start seeing all the movement happen. The baits start moving out, and the flounders start moving because, you know, last week there wasn't really any flounder movement happening, and typically by the time we get to November, you know, the flounder fishing's getting kicked off pretty good. Yeah. Well, now we're starting to see a little flounder action. I know I caught a few starting to move around the pass, and so I think they'll be on their way out pretty soon. And
yeah, and I've talked to a couple of guys that have been out. You guys know Jason Walsingham, and he loves to stick them, you know, as I do. But he's been out a couple of times, hadn't really done much, and the other guys that he talks to, it's been slow. They really haven't started that migration yet.
Yeah, but I think this cold weather is just what we needed to get it kicked off.
I think so too.
Yeah, this is the time of year, you know, we spend most of our time spring, late spring all throughout the summer in the bay boats, and kind of keep the skiff on the trailer, and you know, you use it occasionally through the summer, but primarily in the bigger boat. And it's nice to get to this time of year where you can get back in the skiff, and that's what I really enjoy, the shallow water fishing. Enjoy all of it, but when you go for long periods of time without being able to get up shallow and do some sight fishing, it just makes it that much better than when the time gets here. So I think, like Justin was saying, with the water being still a little warmer than it has been, you know, typically for this time of year, this gradual, now we've been such a gradual cool down now with this cool front that's come through. I think we'll really be in that full fall mode, and had some warm days.
Oh yeah, we had.
We had real warm,
real Indian summer weather.
One thing that we've noticed with the redfish all over the bay system is it seems like with the water starting to cool now, the mornings have been a little slower for the redfish. It seems like we've been seeing more fish in the afternoon. So you get in that summertime mindset of early mornings,
right.
every day. Well, when we move into this fall pattern, you can really have some better days later in the day. That early morning is not so important.
Well, I thought, when we first start this transition, it takes them a little bit to adjust too.
Certainly,
absolutely.
That's right.
I mean, they're going through some changes, with water temperature and the bait movement and things like that. So, it's a little bit different for them as well.
Absolutely, and another thing, I was telling a client the other day, the other advantage to starting later is your visibility. When you're fishing shallow and you start at daylight, you're pretty limited. So with us, a lot of times, half day or 6+ hour trip, first few hours, very limited visibility is a factor. Whereas you can start 8, 9 o'clock, fish up through the best part of the day visibility wise. A lot of times your tide's going to start moving better by then and just makes for a better trip. The other thing is the fish starting to group up. We have yet to see, I've seen a few small groups of fish, but not anything like you'd hope to see as the fish start to come together. Sometimes that's a silver lining though, because you fish a large area and you have kind of fish spread out gradually and you get more opportunities instead of 1 or 2 big schools of fish. But they're just not really bunched up. And the other thing I watch is the mullet.
I was fixing to say.
A lot of our local viewers watching it, the fall mullet run is a kind of a tradition, and I get a lot of questions whether or not I'm seeing them up in the bay really thick, and the answer has been no up to this point. I've seen them over big stretches, down flats, but not so thick like I could say you could walk on them.
Yeah, and on the mullet front, I have started to see some better numbers of mullet, and then also heard for some guys said that they're all got roe now, they're.
And the size of these things.
Oh, yeah.
Some of those mullet would knock you off the front of the boat.
Well, I like to look when I see these strings of mullet, pushing in a flat. I like to look in there. A lot of times you have a couple redfish mixed right in with them.
Absolutely.
Some of the mullet is so big, it's hard to tell the difference.
That's it.
Yeah, you have to look close.
Yeah.
You have to look close. We saw some the other day, and I was convinced that there was 3 or 4 reds in there.
Redfish size mullet.
I was like, my goodness, it's time to break the nets out.
They've
do
done
a
well.
do a little bit of
Oh,
wading out there.
Absolutely.
So, all right, gentlemen, let's take our first break, and then we'll come right back and continue on how you're going to fish this fall pattern. Welcome back. Let's take a quick look now at our peak fishing times brought to us by Mark Coward out at Edgewater Realty. We're looking at 9:05 to 11:05 p.m. and 7:35 to 11:35 a.m. And again, today's going to be tough. Not a lot of water moving, but let's talk about that a minute. What happens when you guys have the trip set up, you got a 4-tide day, water's not moving much?
Yeah, that's pretty much anytime for us here, anytime you see you have 4 tides in a day, that means there's basically no tide.
Little to no movement between all of them. I immediately change my expectations.
Oh, absolutely.
And I also, it changes the way that I fish and approach the day. The main reason being because if I've got a big range on my tide, I expect a lot of fish movement. And so I might be more apt to say, look at multiple places in a shorter amount of time, expecting to catch those fish moving up. Whereas on the first example, with the multiple tides and very little movement, I'm more likely to commit to an area and really try to pick it apart, not expecting there to be a lot of fish moving.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that you have to go where you think you've got your best shot and really fish it out.
Yeah, I got 2 things that I try to do in a situation like that. One would be I try to do more sight fishing. If you're fishing a flat that has some creek mouths and you have a hard tide movement, you could go to those little creek mouths, like if you're fishing a hard falling tide, and expect redfish especially is what I'm talking about. But you can expect those fish to kind of group up around those creek mouths as that water's moving out.
Oh yeah.
But if you don't have any tide movement, rather than just trying to hit those little creek mouths, I'm going to stay out on the flat. I'm going to try to put myself in a good situation with the sun to my back, and look for those fish. And because even if they're not real active, if you can see them, a lot of times you can fish a small soft plastic or something real subtle, and if you're putting it right in his face, you can make them bite. So one thing I would do is try to sight fish where you're seeing the fish, you know they're there, and you can make that fish bite. And then the other thing, let's say if you're not red fishing on a flat, you're wanting to do some live baiting. I fish pinch points where the bay narrows down, because what little tide movement you do have is going to be magnified in those areas. And a lot of times they're around bridges, because bridges are always built across the narrowest points of the bay. The water will move faster through those areas.
Yeah, and that's excellent. I mean, you know, it happens to us once a month, right?
That's it.
I mean,
and we know when it's
you
going to
can't
happen.
always, and you know when it's going to happen, but you can't always cherry pick. You know, if you're working, this is your day off to fish, and this is your time. You know, we can't. Well, it's wonderful to be able to pick and choose and go and to fish the perfect conditions. But and I always not really took that for granted, but now especially with my brother-in-law who comes down from Georgia and fishes with me so often, it was like when he comes down, that's the time he's got to fish. So whether it's crappie or whether the tides aren't moving or anything else, we got to fish.
It's a luxury to be able to do it, you know, and pick your days, and that's something that, you know, when you're in the business, you get folks that call you and they've got one day they can fish, and you don't get to pick your conditions, and that's where you really that's where your job really comes in, is being able to create opportunities across the whole spectrum of conditions. And I would say some of the most rewarding days are the days where you go out knowing that you don't have the best conditions, and you go out and you make it happen.
And you make a few fish.
Absolutely.
And Justin, you mentioned this. Do you downsize a little bit?
I don't know. I think that the size would vary with all the other conditions. I tend to vary size depending on what, you know, I really do try to match the hatch. It depends on what time of year it is, what the fish are feeding on. You know, if they're feeding on mullet, you know, I'll tend to stick with a little larger bait. You know, once it gets real cold, we're getting to full winter pattern. You know, and they're in little creek mouths and stuff. I think they feed on shrimp a lot. And you know, so then that's when I really start downsizing, when we get later into the winter. But you know, I try to just stick with whatever I think that they're feeding on.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and the other part with the little water movement would be I would fish less active baits, like Justin was talking about, trying to sight fish more when you don't have much of a tide. I feel like you're going to be more productive doing that and making specific casts than you are going out in what we call searching water, throwing a bunch of lures, fast-moving baits. Those fish are going to be less likely to chase down a fast-moving topwater or some other type of bait, right?
Because I mean, they're just not active.
They're just not active, and when you get the opportunity to see a lot of the conditions like that, you'll see those fish, and I call them laid up. They're just laid up. They'll lay in sand holes or whatever, and they're not going to chase something down a lot of times.
Yeah. So you're going now to the Z-Man, to the
right.
gulps.
That's right.
Yeah.
Something that you're putting on the bottom and just hopping, just kind of putting in front of them.
Absolutely, and that's much more of a high percentage situation or a scenario than going out and trying to cover a bunch of water. Because frankly, there's a lot of days where you have the right conditions, you want to cover. Like we talk about that all the time, covering as much water as you possibly can.
Yeah, sure.
Under that situation, I say it's the other end of the spectrum. Slow it down. Look for every opportunity and really make some good, accurate casts. There again, visibility probably be one of your best advantages on that day.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a day like today where you have those, you know, the peak feeding times is in that mid-morning, you know, around lunchtime. Since you're not really relying on any tide movement for you know, activity, that would be perfect, because you're going to have that sun's going to be high, put that sun to your back, and you're at those peak feeding times. So between those two things, you should be able to see them, and that'd be your best time of day to get them to bite. So,
what about if you're using the gulps? That's one thing, but I know you guys tend to use a lot of Z-Man stuff too, don't you?
Yeah, especially during the warmer months. I mean, when the water gets real cold, you know, the pinfish, choker's not a bad problem. But I tell you what, you can burn through 3 or 4 packs of any other soft plastics, and then in the day, you know, and then, but if you're fishing that Z-Man, you can finish with the same one that you started with at the beginning of the day.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, once you get the rigging part down.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah, you got to use some different hooks, but But if you use their hooks that are designed for it, they're easy to rig, and you don't spend half the day re-rigging. And that is another thing. You don't realize how much of the day you spend with the normal paddle tail re-rigging, because the pinfish are just pulling the tails off constantly. And it is amazing. Oh man,
Eat them up. Just to eat them up.
Yeah,
But
a lot of life.
are you applying scent to those baits? Or
Well, those
I
come
know they're
with it.
impregnated with them.
Yeah, they come with it, and I don't do anything beyond that.
I don't think it ever hurts. But with us, so many times we're so focused, especially on a shallow water trip. You're up on that platform, you're poling, you're looking, and you generally, you might be helping someone with tackle, something like that. You kind of got your hands full. But if you're out on your own and you're fishing and you're down in the boat and you can apply any kind of scent, anything like that, I think is beneficial.
Well, yeah, Greg and I fished one morning. It just did nothing. It was very little tide moving, nothing.
Yeah.
And once it changed, and we actually went, grabbed something to eat, got some gas, came back out. I put on a brand new soft bait that I'd never used before, and I put some scent on it and caught 2 or 3 real quick. And I looked at Greg. I said, "You think that really makes a difference?" Going back to what you said, he said, "Well, it didn't hurt."
Didn't hurt. Oh, it doesn't hurt. No, anything like that.
All right, let's take our last break here. We'll come back and continue this discussion. All right, welcome back. We're continuing our discussion about the bay and how it's changing right now. And one thing you haven't talked about, and I know some guys do this, but you start getting into this fall pattern, as you call it. Are you changing colors?
I don't a whole lot, because the waters remain clear.
Yeah.
If we were having a bunch of rain, say like we did last year, I was fishing darker color, stuff like that. But I keep it pretty much the same.
And
might
I do
be an
as well.
opportunity.
Water conditions.
Yeah, well, that would be the main key, I think, is water clarity.
Yeah, and we've talked about that. But I did have somebody tell me that they go away from, even with the water being the same, that they kind of go away from the lighter colored baits that they're using in the summer to a darker winter pattern, which I've never really.
Well, I could see one particularly noteful thing I could see with that would be, you go from more bait fish as far as being your forage to shrimp and crabs, that being a lighter to darker transition. So I could see where that would possibly be.
Maybe
be
go to more tan color, kind of more natural colors.
Yeah.
And again, I would say that would be consistent with water clarity throughout the year. As that water gets clearer and clearer, I tend to stay away from chartreuses and stuff like that and go to more tans and natural tones. When that water gets real clear.
And again, too, if you can determine, what bait's around there, and you go to something that match the hatches, it's called. But and especially with it being so clear, you can pretty much identify what's out.
And I think a lot of it goes back, we talk about the feeding times. We're real particular on the tides. I think that's the single most important factor with the shallow water fishing. And I get the question on the boat all the time. We get into this discussion while we're fishing about lures and that sort of thing. I think redfish is one of the most finicky. I wouldn't necessarily say maybe so much as a bass. Spent a lot of time pursuing bass, and they can be as fickle as any fish that swims. But a redfish is he can turn on and off like a light switch, and when he's on, when those fish are shallow and they're moved up and they're feeding, especially when there's numbers and they have that competitive nature about them, I don't think a whole lot of the small details matter. Yeah. There are times where it does, but I feel like there's some days I can cut a piece of my sock off and catch one. That's the situation you want to find. Yeah. But there's so many different factors.
And those days where I've threatened to take the entire tackle bag and just throw it in the water and see if they'll come up and look at anything.
There is no magic lure on those days. You just enjoy looking at them.
Yeah, that's right.
But that's what I've tried to tell people. I was like, when they're not feeding, especially redfish. Now trout, you might entice, with trout, but when they're not feeding, you better enjoy being outside, or the challenge of trying to like you said, to get one to take something.
Yeah, the thing with that, if you're there and you're seeing a bunch of fish, that's when you really want to take note of the conditions, look at your tides. And when I'm in that situation, I'm usually looking, and especially with a client on the boat, I'm saying, you know what, they're not feeding right now, but here at some point they will. They will. And so, that beats catching the tail end of that feeding period and then having 2 or 3 hours of when they do feed, and you're wrapping up and going in. So that's, there's silver lining there. They will feed at some point.
All right, so we're coming into this transition, you know, that you don't have a lot of tide, on the days you don't have a lot of tide movement, I think the consensus is you know, you go to an area, you sight as much as you can, but you fish out an area, and you just vary what you're fishing, right? I mean, you know, continue to throw stuff.
I'd say slow down.
Yeah, slow down.
Yeah, slow it down, and that's true. To do something where you're putting something in front of them that's a little bit slower, the soft baits and those kind of things.
I would say the one thing I think what we're kind of trying to get across, put simply, is use your eyes to find the fish rather than your lures. You know, there's a lot of days red fishing where you're throwing spoons, top waters, fast moving, search lures. Okay, well, if the fish are not very active, they're probably not going to bite those search lures, which means it might be hard for you to find them. Well, in that scenario, that's when we try to stay up high on the platform, put ourselves in a good sight fishing situation, and then that way we can still find the fish and not have to rely on those fast moving search lures to find them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, you vary as well whether you're using that soft bait with the lead or using it without one, you know, for presentation purposes and equipment purposes for what you've got and what'll throw it, right?
Absolutely.
You prefer not to have a lead head on something?
It's a lot of days when it's really still and there's not a lot of tide movement. If I can get away with it, I won't unweighted because I feel like it's just a much more subtle entry. Again, those fish
and I find myself using more and more weedless hooks with a very small lead, 16th, 32nd ounce, you know, very small lead on there, just enough to kind of act as a keel to get it to swim straight, more or less than you know, using like a jig head. Okay. But something else, never mind, we'll go ahead.
That's okay. Well, we're running out of time again.
We always
how do somebody get in touch with you?
Best way, website?
PanamaCityInshore.com,
right.
Is that right?
Yep.
Hey, listen, these guys know how to fish this bay and this Gulf. If you're looking to learn, they're great guys to get a hold of and fish with. So appreciate you tuning in. We got to get out of here, but have a great day. Do something good for somebody.
Thanks for joining us for Panhandle Outdoors with Winston Chester. Panhandle Outdoors features hunting, fishing, and other activities and information to help you enjoy the great outdoors. Join us next time for Panhandle Outdoors.